manager at Politics and Prose bookstore in DC, and your host for this talk on event disruption, dealing with difficult customers. I think we're going to have a great conversation. Whether in person or online, someone invariably disrupts an event. Is that true? I'm just kidding. How do I interact with a difficult customer, someone disrupting an event? What are some things that I should think about beforehand? How do I manage, what do I should think about for online events? Be discussing all of this and a lot more. I think we have a great talk lined up here for everyone. First, quick round of introductions. I'm very excited to start off to be on here with Brittany Kerfoot and Tory Ruttenberg. Brittany is the Deputy Director of Events for Politics and Prose, as well as a part-time instructor in our programs department. Before coming to PMP, she worked events at the Penn Faulkner Foundation and at George Mason University's Fall for the Book Festival. Hi, Brittany. Thanks so much for hopping on. And Tory is an organizational consultant with expertise in conflict resolution. Her projects focus on helping people in a variety of businesses deal with difficult clients and customers. These businesses have included retail organizations that handle customer complaints, law firms, and legal aid organizations whose clients are upset, law firms and legal and property managers whose tenants are unhappy. And Tory is also a certified mediator and has mediated more than 100 cases. Before we get going into some other quick housekeeping items, first I'd like to thank our conference sponsors whose support has made this event possible, made this event happen. Thanks to HarperCollins, Hachette, Simon & Schuster, Source Books, Blackstone Publishing, Scholastic, and Penguin Random House. Also, a quick reminder that we are to follow the conference's code of conduct, and please remember that we are all considered competitors, and there are to be no discussion on terms or boycotts. Please read the policies on the New Voices New Room website. I figure if we want to take the first 25, 30 minutes, we can just read that. Just kidding. So Tory, Brittany, and I are all going to be speaking for a few minutes on a variety of topics, and then we're going to be opening up for discussion at the end. So if you do have any questions, if you do want to hop on, ask that you keep all those to the end of the conversation. But if you have a question that you already know that you've got lined up, feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll kind of get to as many of those as possible. And so now onto the main event. So I'm going to get us started about in-person events. Politics and Prose last year had learned a lot of lessons, I think, from some of the events that we had had. We had had some disruptions at some of our events at the main store on Connecticut Avenue here in DC, some of which had made the news. And sort of on the in-store side, the operation for the everyday bookseller, really emphasized the need to have a kind of firm plan in place for any possible event disruptions. Can take any number of different formats. Who knows what could happen? It could be one person, it could be a group of people, it can come from any sort of anywhere on the spectrum of beliefs and thoughts. And so we came up with a plan for event assignments, essentially. And I thought that when we were coming up with this for last year, again, as we were kind of thinking through all the events that we'd had disruptions at and had to give people the tools to handle them kind of in real time, we kind of came up with this framework. And I think it's a good framework, even though, if you don't have the staffing to kind of dedicate one person to each role, I think it's still kind of a good way to kind of think through kind of assignments or duties or things that you need to think about when you're kind of going into an event that maybe you have some concerns about, maybe you've seen some traffic on your social media or some comments from the community in some fashion. And so I'm just going to go through kind of that framework and have this broken down into sort of a series of questions. So let's say, the scenario is you have an author talk, it's in person. Eventually we'll be able to get back to in person. Something happens, whether someone is, takes the microphone, has disrupted the event in some fashion. What do you do? First question, what happens with the author? Obviously with author talks, there's can always be the potential that they are kind of the focal point of the potential conflict of the situation. And so we, for every event that we had in the store, we always had a dedicated event host. They were responsible for doing the introduction, going over housekeeping items and that sort of thing. And they were the ones who were responsible for, again, if a situation should happen, taking the author and kind of removing them from that situation. And we had an office kind of nearby where we have our events at the main store, and kind of putting them in that room as a way to hopefully kind of de-escalate and kind of deflate the situation and kind of almost physically get some space. I think I got muted. Did everybody hear me? Good? Okay, good. What happens with the audio equipment, with microphones? We have a part-time event staffer who would help run, would set up chairs, would plug in the audio equipment, and they were the ones who were responsible for, again, when a situation starts to unfold, immediately go over and kind of shut those off as, again, another way to try to deflate and kind of de-escalate the whole situation. Who instructs the disruptors on what to do? At the main store at Politics and Prose, we have a shift supervisor. We have one, an opening shift supervisor and a closing shift supervisor. And the closing shift supervisor sort of kind of acts as sort of the official witness, is the person who kind of comes out and politely engages with whoever is causing the disruption, and provides any instructions that are needed, whether it's to stop or to step back or to leave, and also kind of acts as sort of the official witness should that situation need to continues to escalate. Who should I alert about the disruption? This is one thing that I think that it took a while for us to really wrap our head around, because we are such a big space here at the main store, that it can feel kind of separated and siloed. But if there's a situation happening, you want to, as much as possible, kind of alert everybody, all your staff, as much as possible in the building, not only for potentially their own, safety, their a possibility that they could wander into a situation that is very sort of tense, but then also getting a hold of additional kind of backup and resources. So we have someone who's always at our info desk, and they sort of act as our kind of communication hub, and they would get the word out to, if there's someone in the shipping and receiving department, if there's someone in a back office, there's a situation going on, and also if needed, if they need additional sort of help or resources, and also kind of alerting, getting the word out to management. So the system had been getting word out to our floor manager, operations director, our owners, and other senior management. Another thing to think about: what if people keep coming into the store? We had a role where one of the booksellers was stationed to cover the door, ask customers, let them know that one of our events is being disrupted, and ask them to either hold off on going towards the back end of the store. They can shop kind of downstairs, or to just hold and wait outside while the disruption kind of wraps itself up. We have been fortunate, kind of on our direct experiences with in-person events, that most of them wrapped up in just a few minutes. Again, it's a tense few minutes. It can feel obviously a lot longer, but having someone who's sort of managing the kind of the flow of people into the space. So that's sort of the general kind of like framework. We have someone who interacts with the author, the audio equipment, like a lot of different pieces. And depending on the staffing level on that particular day, we would collapse a lot of roles. Like, could someone who, if they're maybe working a register shift, can the register person kind of manage the front door? Can the person at the register kind of back up the person who's at the info desk and making sure that everyone is alerted and gets the word out about the situation that's happening? So I think that there is the possibility of sort of collapsing roles depending on your own sort of staffing situation. And I did also try to put these sort of in order of, I think, like a good order of priority, so that would hopefully help, again, to sort of as quickly as possible kind of de-escalate the situation, hopefully get it wrapped up as safely as possible, sooner rather than than later. Another thing too, we always had, again, kind of getting back to communication, we always had an opening and closing shift meetings where we went over the priorities of the day, figuring out who's doing what are the projects, and then also going over the event for the evening and making sure that all those event assignments, all those roles were assigned out. And we got to a point, when we started discussing this and kind of thinking about it, that we realized that one question that I would get a lot when I talk about this is, how did you know when to do it? And we got to a point where it's like, we just decided to start doing it on every closing shift. You can kind of, not because we had any sort of specific concerns really, but just in order to sort of get a lot of practice to make it kind of second nature, so that when that situation does arise, again, like people are in that habit, they're already kind of thinking like the way that they should, or that they need to kind of get the situation resolved. I mean, really just practice is a big mantra for me in terms of, how to handle a lot of this stuff. And I think that we were pretty successful. We did have like one or two small incidences where we did have to, like, we kind of saw it in action. Would do debriefs with the staff afterwards, or also in real time as they're texting me, as situations were unfolding. And I think it definitely helped. It can't 100% take away sort of like the anxiety and the worries surrounding those types of situations when they do happen. But I think just having a general framework for how they should respond, what they should be thinking about, really helped in sort of those potential in-person event disruptions. So with that though, what do you do when you actually have to directly interact with the difficult person? And I'm now going to kick it over to Tory and get some thoughts on dealing with difficult customers. Not that there are difficult customers, but there are. Ooh, Tory, I think you're still muted.
I'm muting myself there. I must forget to mute myself pretty much every call I'm ever on. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. Here actually technically being my living room, but I'm delighted to be on with you. Anyway, as Michael mentioned, I'm going to focus on some techniques for dealing with customers who are being rude, difficult, impatient, etc. There isn't enough time today to talk about how to deal with people who are deliberately trying to provoke you. They're being racist, sexist, ageist, etc. Because that's a very sort of difficult and complicated thing. But I'm going to talk to people about people who are just really unpleasant. And I'm going to sort of break this up into two parts. One is when you're actually speaking to somebody voice to voice, whether it's on the phone or in person, and then the other via email. So I know that this type of situation can be difficult at any time, but it's just really complicated dealing with customers right now because everybody's stress levels, I'm sure yours as well as theirs, are just, elevated. And plus, with more, if not for many of you, most communication going on by email or by phone, it's really that much harder to deal with people when things arise because you can't read body language. You can't have any personal contact. It's not possible to say, oh, Mr. Smith, it's so nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks. Like all that gets lost. So it just becomes completely transactional. So I think the best way to enter into one of these situations is just to really assume the best of the person in front of you, because the problem is that unless somebody is overtly saying something just incredibly personal and nasty, it can be really difficult to tell the difference between someone who is being an intentional jerk versus an unintentional jerk. So give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't make assumptions. For all you know, somebody who's just teeing off on you for the fact that a book they ordered hasn't arrived, has just been furloughed, they have someone who's close to them is sick, or who knows what. And I know even before the pandemic and everything else, if I was driving and I was getting mad at somebody because they were, they cut me off or whatever, I would, my initial reaction would usually, you jerk, I'd flip them off. Who knows what I'd do? But I tried to instead make up a positive story about them, because the truth is I have no idea what's actually going on with them. So I would try to make some assumptions like, oh, maybe somebody's having a baby and they're rushing to the hospital. Like, just try to reframe it in my own mind. And that goes a long way just to kind of make you feel better so that you don't kind of take out your stress on them. If you're dealing with somebody on the phone or in person, really the most important thing you can do is just listen to them. Do your best not to interrupt them. Sometimes, somebody's talking for so long, you really don't have any choice, but just try to focus. Try not to be thinking about your response while they're talking, because that's actually not listening. And, the reason that you do that is, first, you might learn something. It might be that you all did make a big mistake, or something that you thought was working in one way wasn't, being translated that well. And then the other is that, listening is a real sign of respect. And so if somebody thinks you're not listening to them, they're going to think that you don't respect them, at which point they're going to escalate. And, one of the real goals here is to figure out how to interact with people so that difficult situations don't kind of blow up. Try to, put yourself in their shoes to understand why they might be upset about something. And if someone's, say there's something specific that they're frustrated about, again, let's say they've been told a book is ready and they've come there and it's not in the store. And, in this day and age, for some people, for many people, leaving the house, going out, putting on a mask is really, really stressful. So it's not as simple as, oh, I'm just going to pop in tomorrow. So acknowledge their frustration, acknowledge their feeling, even if they're the ones who made the mistake, even if it's very clear that you told them it wouldn't be here till next Thursday and they thought it was this Thursday. That doesn't mean that you're saying to them that they're right and you're wrong, but you're saying, I hear you, I understand how frustrating that is, to have shown up here, to have made the effort to come here. I know you really want this book. Let's see if there's anything we can do. And maybe there's nothing you can do. But again, what we're looking for here is sort of de-escalation. And then if they're right, and if in fact, one of the reasons that they are upset is that the store has made a mistake, just acknowledge it and then tell them how you're going to fix it. Don't give them a long explanation about, oh, I'm so sorry, the person who usually responds to our emails and does our scheduling has been out because she had bunion surgery and blah, blah. They don't care about that. They just want to know, I'm so sorry, we made a mistake. And, here's what we're going to do. We're going to ship it directly to your house at no charge, or, whatever it is. On to email. Email, as I said, it's just really hard because it tends to be, very brusque, very direct. There's no emotional content. There's no emotional tone. There's no body language. People a lot of times write them really quickly. They don't even punctuate them. They don't reread them. And, but again, you can assume the best here. So one of the techniques that often works is if you get something that just seems really nasty, try reading it out loud in different tones of voice, or even if read it out loud to yourself, in your head. So let's say again, back to the book that I've ordered that's not there. If I'm in person, I say, oh, the book I ordered is supposed to be here, it's not in. Do you have any idea, where it might be? Because, I'm supposed to bring it over to a friend tomorrow. And, really, so it's perfectly friendly. I'm not, we have a fine conversation about that. If I write that in an email, though, the way you might read it is, the book I ordered isn't in. Do you have any idea where it might be? So same thing, same words, comes across completely differently. If someone makes you really angry with their emails, go ahead and blast them, but do not put any addresses in the address line and then delete the thing. But that can be a good way to vent. If you're not writing just a straight venting email, but you're not happy and you're writing back immediately, see if you can wait a couple hours before sending a response, and go back when you've had a chance to kind of get away from everybody and reread it. If you don't have time to kind of let it percolate, then see if you have a colleague that you can run it by before you can send before you send it. And then finally, I'd say it's really important, and this obviously applies to everything right now, is to take care of yourself. So I would imagine that everybody on this call is currently more stressed than they were a year ago. And probably everyone on this call is having times when you're just not coming across at your best. And so if you are running into a situation where somebody's being rude to you and you just kind of had it with the world, see if you can just, if you're in front of them, just focus on your breathing. A lot of times I'll put my hand like right on my stomach and take deep breaths. Concentrate on relaxing your shoulders, relaxing your jaw. A lot of times even just slowing your voice down and using a calm, quiet voice can calm you down as well as them. And then if you can, get away, go for a quick walk, meditate before work or on a break. And then, just in general, do your best to get some exercise, get enough sleep, eat healthily, reach out to friends, and just kind of be kind to yourself. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Brittany.
Thanks, Tori. Hi, guys. Like Michael said, my name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm the Deputy Director of Events for Politics and Prose. And we jumped on virtual events almost as quickly as the pandemic hit and things started shutting down. So our events have been fully virtual since late March. So we've been doing this for a bit. And so I've definitely learned some tips and tricks. Just for some background, we do about an average of 15 to 18 events per week, which is definitely a robust program. And that includes weekends usually. And then we have a team of 3 event staffers, so myself and then 2 other event coordinators who help with booking and getting up ticket links and hosting events and doing all that stuff. And then we occasionally have help from booksellers or people from other departments doing things like giving the introductions or maybe managing the Q&A portion if there's no moderator, things like that. Our events have been a mix of free and bundled with a book. Most of them are free to the public, but we have been doing more fully bundled events. And I will say there are far fewer disruptions in a bundled event because trolls don't like to pay money. So if they're gonna buy the book and they're gonna, spend that like $30, it's pretty rare that they will try to disrupt anything. For platforms, we started out using Crowdcast when we first started, which was very slick and very secure, but we did have some technical issues with it. It was pretty unreliable as a streaming service, so we have since switched to Zoom Webinar, and that's what we use now. We use meetings for our classes, but pretty much all of our events are webinar, which means no one other than the host and the panelists, so the author, the moderator, can be seen or heard. It is impossible for an attendee to unmute themselves or take their video off unless the very slim chance that they were able to like hack our account and sign in, which is pretty hard to do. So we also, we stream live to YouTube sometimes, pretty often actually, to try to get more viewers. And if you do that, it is great that you can capture more viewers, but you do want to make sure that someone is monitoring the comments on the YouTube as well as in the chat, which can be a little tricky if you only have one person on hand, because as I'm sure you know, people on YouTube can get just as rowdy and make inappropriate comments. So on YouTube, you can delete comments. You can also put a user in timeout, which I think is amazing. And what timeout does on YouTube is it keeps them from commenting for, I think, 300 seconds, some kind of random number. And a lot of times they'll just be like, well, forget it. I don't feel like waiting to make another troll comment. I'll move on to another video. And they kind of stop. So that's just a quick tip for YouTube. But I really like Zoom Webinar, and Crowdcast is very secure as well. We do not use passwords to protect our Zoom webinars, but we do require registration, and we do that through Eventbrite. So Eventbrite just rolled out with this great upgrade where it links Zoom and Eventbrite. So anyone who registers on Eventbrite now gets automatically registered for the Zoom, and it's one email address per registration. So they have to register on Eventbrite first. And again, luckily, a lot of trolls won't want to go through the rigmarole of having to sign up on Eventbrite and then sign in via Zoom. So that's been really nice and feels very secure. Like I said, it's virtually impossible on Zoom webinar for someone to take over, but as we all know, the chat is where a lot of times things can get a little crazy. What I like about webinar is you can close the chat down. So you can either start with the chat completely off, or if someone says, if the chat starts getting rowdy, you can turn it off midway through the event and say, no, forget it, you guys have lost your privilege. And then only you can chat. So that's where we do things like drop a book link, drop any information about how to ask a question on the Q&A, things like that, but attendees cannot chat at all. So you can turn that on and off during the event, which is really nice. It doesn't have to be set up before the event, and you can't change it. You can kind of switch around. I know that something happened at an event this summer and kind of has happened where hackers got in. I'm not even sure how, but took over a Zoom account. Again, that's really rare for that to happen. But because of that, publicists, and I'm sure you might have noticed, have been really diligent about asking bookstores for, what is your security plan? How are you going to keep my authors safe? How are you going to keep this event from being disrupted and getting hacked? And I can actually drop a link in the chat in a bit that I think it was New Pages just came out with kind of guidelines for how bookstores can do that, things that they need to do, and following the code of conduct to make sure that authors are not triggered or being trolled. So I'll drop a link to that in a bit. Webinar also has a green room feature, which is really nice. You can talk to the authors before you ever go live. So if there are any concerns, or for example, something that's great to ask is, are there any questions that you don't want to answer? We've had authors say, oh, I don't want to answer questions about, you know, my marriage or my family. And it's really good to find that out, because for webinar at least, and I think Crowdcast is the same, you can delete questions from the Q&A space, so that if they did ask a question that could be potentially triggering or upsetting to the author, you read it and you immediately just delete it. And Zoom also has this feature that's really cool, where you can work in your settings that either you want your questions to be shown to everyone so all the attendees can see what other people are submitting, or you can hide the Q&A so that only you and the author can see, and the moderator can see the Q&A. And that way, let's say you turn the chat off, sometimes people find a loophole and they will then get rowdy in the Q&A section. And so this way, if they do that, you can immediately delete it and no one else will see it. And they can't kind of play off of each other in the Q&A because they can't even read what anyone else is saying. So that's a really nice feature. And being able to dismiss the questions is really great too. Let's see. So a couple of ways that we've been really lucky in the virtual space where we haven't had anything too crazy happen, but we have had some people in the chat use inappropriate language or say offensive things, or we'll have you know, a user that we recognize his or her username comes up every time and always has to make a comment in our events. Like I said, this happens way more in free events than in bundled events. But one thing that we've just recently started doing is whoever gives the introduction, just to say something like, in this space, we encourage creativity and the sharing of ideas, but hateful language has no place here. And we ask that you treat our authors and the other attendees with respect throughout the event. And typically for an event that's like, you know, fiction or poetry, something that's not too politically charged, the authors really appreciate that, and it does kind of set the tone. For something that I think will have more trolls, or if the publicist has told me this author has had issues, this author has people who come for them, we've seen it in the past, I will be a little bit more firm. So for example, we had a panel with sexual assault survivors, and I was very worried that there would be some people who disrupted that. And I was just very firm and just said, hateful or harassing comments will not be tolerated, and attendees who exhibit this kind of behavior will be removed immediately. And I think, again, that really sets the tone and lets them know, like, you can try, but we're going to kick you out. Because on Zoom, you can kick people out, and I have done it, and it's very satisfying to kick out someone who is being disrespectful. So it's really nice. It happens immediately. It's very easy to do. It's like 1 or 2 clicks. And they cannot get back in. Even I guess they could sign up on Eventbrite with a new email address, then get a Zoom, but that's a lot of work. And so we haven't seen that happen yet. So that's been really nice, but especially for political events, especially around a crazy contentious election like this, people are looking for ways to kind of, let out their frustration, to use a euphemism, and just be jerks. And so you just really have to stay on top of that chat. And you really have to stay, if you're using Zoom or YouTube, you have to stay on top of that chat comment and check the Q&A. Because I have, some people use the Q&A like a chat because they just don't realize the difference, which is fine, but some people do it intentionally, and you just have to be on it. But like I said, the green room is a really good time to talk to your authors and say, just so you know, here's what we're doing. Someone will be monitoring the chat. Someone will be monitoring the Q&A. Are there things that you don't want to be asked? Are there things you don't want to talk about? And I usually tell the authors, don't even bother looking at the chat, because it's really just distracting for them anyway. And if they want to see the chat after, if it happened to be a really lovely event, we had an event with Chanel Miller, and the chat was just the most lovely, encouraging, beautiful thing I've ever seen. Just a lot of people being really encouraging. And I said, I'll email it to you afterward. You can save the chat on Zoom webinar, and some authors really do want to see that because it really makes them happy. So yeah, I just say, I'll email it to you afterward. Don't worry about it during the event, because if someone does say something crappy, you don't want them to just happen to see it out of the corner of their eye and just let it ruin their time. Because even if you do remove them, there's still a chance that the author saw it. So in the green room, I often say, unless you really want to, I would just close the chat, because it can be distracting, and they usually do. But I mean, the bottom line is there's no way to 100% guarantee trolls will not try to ruin your event. The main thing that we found is we prevent it as much as we can, but if it happens, the important thing is how quickly you react to it, and that you don't let the author see that it's happening. So, I don't, unless it's absolutely necessary, I haven't had to come on screen and say, and break through the event and say anything. I handle it all quietly on the back end, so that from the screen, everything looks like it's going on as normal. But if it does get to a point where it's out of hand, I think it's much better to jump on screen and close the event and shut it down. And you can even just say, we're having some technical difficulties. We're going to need to shut this event down. That's so much better than having something happen where something really hurtful happens, or it goes too far. And it really shakes the authors to the core. I've seen authors, say, I don't even want to do a virtual event anymore if something happened at another bookstore where they were targeted. And I understand that. I probably wouldn't either. That's really scary. And people are so much more likely to be trollish on the internet because they can hide behind that screen and no one has to see their face or know their identity, or no, security guard is going to tackle them than if they're in person. So it's just really important to, if something happens, take care of it behind the screen. You don't have to let the author know. You don't have to say, I kicked out so-and-so because he used the slur. Because again, even though you took care of it, that's just gonna put a damper on their experience. So I just take care of stuff behind the scenes, let it go on as normal. And usually 99.9% of the time, that has been enough to just kind of quash it and let everything happen as it needs to. So that is my spiel, but if you guys have questions or want to share your own experiences with any kind of trolls or difficult customers, We would love to hear it, Tory and Michael and I, and we are happy to answer any questions that you have about how to handle this stuff or how we've handled it in the past. So you can either drop your question or comment in the chat, or just feel free to unmute yourself and we'll have a chat. But I would love to hear if anyone has had a difficult experience.
I have a question. Can I sort of get started with the question?
Of course.
Okay, so I would like to know if you have any advice for stores who, you know, small size staff who, the person who is helping to run the event is probably, you know, the owner is probably like the MC and taking care of the author. And so the people who are helping to run the event are the part-time, they're usually behind the cash wrap. They don't have a lot of experience managing. They might not feel empowered to kick somebody out. Like, do you have a suggestion or some tips to train staff in that situation so that they feel like they have they'll be backed up, they have the control to actually, you know, everybody's so trained to like do what the customer wants to.
Right.
I think it's a great question, and something that I think a lot about in my role here. I try to help coordinate some of the training here at Politics and Prose, and for me, I think it starts so much. You know, I talked a lot about communication in the beginning, and I think it still is like very crucial. Like I think we've come across that here with the staff at PMP, and you know, worrying about how you know, the customer is always right, and I always try to change that idea immediately. I mean, that's not something that, you know, we believe here, I believe here at PMP, but I always say that the customer's not always right, but the customer is always the customer. And to me, that always kind of helps kind of think through what those dynamics are, and kind of reiterating with staff. You know, I've had the exact same question. If you know, if with some of our staff or supervisors or management, like if I need to make a difficult decision and I decided to kick someone out, like, will that backing be there? And I think a lot of that assurance comes from just like from that dialogue and from that conversation, and reiterating that first and foremost, you know, it's about safety of the space, safety of the staff, safety of the community here, and yeah, and just reiterate, like almost kind of constantly reiterating that with them, and then two, kind of walking them through, you know, the times where I've had to do it, and just break it down as simple as possible. Kind of what Tory was talking about earlier. You know, the times where I've had to do it, it hasn't been a lengthy thing. It's just been, you know, I appreciate you have your concerns. I'm not going to be able to address them, you know, in this format, in this situation. You know, if you have any other follow-up, you can speak with our co-owners. Otherwise, please leave, and thank you very much. And just giving them, like, it sounds simple, but just giving them that like kind of clear path on how to do that if you're asking them how to feel empowered to do it.
Yeah, I always let my event coordinators know, I trust your judgment, and if you feel that something is hurtful, violent, you know, offensive, then it probably is. And yeah, like, so I let them know, like, I trust you, and if you think that this person is going to dampen the event as a whole, let them go. And I think setting that precedent, like I said in the intro, of like, here's what the deal is, you know, you can't say we didn't tell you. But also we train, so booksellers who are not event staffers, we train them on Zoom beforehand, because I think it's really important for them in a no stakes environment to check out how to dismiss a question in the Q&A, and how to, you know, turn the chat on and off, so that they're not nervous about doing the right or wrong thing technically before they get in there. So them having some comfort with the Zoom platform really helps as well. But yeah, I also tell them, one time, you know, an attendee said this, I kicked them out. Anything that is similar to that is grounds for termination. And that kind of helps them, like, as a kind of guide.
One question that I think we're getting a lot of votes on is, does anyone have some successful de-escalation techniques towards hostile customers that we can use while allowing us to stay safe? and specifically that this is a in-person situation. For me, at least, the first thing that I think about whenever I'm dealing with a really hostile customer is the physical space and my own boundaries. You know, I have a background where I used to work a lot out in the community and in other different types of formats. And so the first thing that I'm always thinking about is my physical relation to the person. You know, if someone is wanting to get in my face, you know, immediately like taking that step back, or taking, you know, a step, you know, knowing the space around you, like taking a step behind if you have an information desk or a register, and kind of physically separating yourself. And I found like a lot of times that when even people who I've dealt with who are like extraordinarily irate, when they see me make that move, you can kind of see the light bulb sometimes go off in their heads. I'm like, oh, I'm really kind of losing it here. It kind of is that physical reminder of like, okay, maybe I need to take a step back for a second. And I think a lot about prep, really. You know, in these situations, and so and I say that because, like, to know whatever your policies, your procedures are for, you know, how you go about your business. If someone comes, you know, with a specific concern and they're really upset about it, I feel comfortable talking about all the potential possibilities, and can walk them through very quickly, not like a very lengthy conversation, but it's just like, that's just not something that we can accommodate right now. Quick example of a policy, and always giving them an avenue for follow-up, whether it's myself as a manager, or with, you know, if you do have other management or owners that you can refer people to. So yeah, so those are kind of the two things that I think about a lot when I'm in the middle of a situation. Anybody have?
Can I ask? Oh,
Please.
sorry.
I wanted to just chime in on this one, which is that if you feel physically unsafe, you know, you back away and you still are feeling, just make an excuse. Just say, let me go get the manager. Let me go get somebody who knows more about this, even if there's no manager there. Just remove yourself, and then, you know, call, I don't know kind of what the setup is of your stores and how many people you have, but, you know, maybe send somebody else back in there, or just kind of keep away, or call the police if you have to, whatever the level is that you feel, you know, the level of unsafety. If you don't feel unsafe, but they're just yelling at you and really upset, again, if you can kind of put yourself into a calm space and just listen to them and talk to them, just say, yes, it's really frustrating. I understand that you're mad, and just acknowledge what they're feeling, not that their fact pattern is correct. And after all, that will calm them down 9 times out of 10. So.
Yeah, Tori, I just wanted to piggyback on that a little bit. This is so useful, not only for events, but just for the experience of working in retail right now. And a lot of what's coming up for us in our store is we have a policy that folks have to wear masks when they come into our store. And when people push back on that, it's really difficult for our staff to feel like they know how to enforce that. And it's like this very difficult balance between being, because we're a very friendly and opening space, but they also have to exude a certain amount of authority to say, no, this is our policy. So I wonder if you have any specific, we've been talking a lot about de-escalation techniques. If you have any specific tips for that kind of interaction where you need to enforce a policy, but you need to not get in an altercation with somebody.
Is that to me, or did you want sort of specific policies from Politics and Prose, or?
I mean, we're thinking about it in terms of de-escalation. So I wondered if you had any tips for that kind of situation, but I'd love to hear from the bookstores too, if they have this solved.
Yeah, again, a lot of times if you just acknowledge, yeah, I know I hate wearing these too, they're really uncomfortable, but, you know, we have a lot of older clients with pre-existing conditions, customers, whatever, white lie, you know, I live with my sister and she has a pre-existing condition, whatever it is, but just, again, acknowledging, because everybody hates these masks. I mean, they're horrible. I hate wearing them. So if you can kind of look for that grain of truth and just be like, yeah, these things are pain, but this just, and also if somebody's junior, just saying, I'm just so sorry, it's just the store policy and I can't do anything about that. I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, at P&P, we have a table set up right by the front door, and you cannot like enter the store without passing by it. And we have booksellers there every day that the store is open through all hours. And it's like semi-official looking because it's got, they've got their iPad and they've got some hand sanitizer, and they catch every person right before that door even closes and says, "Hi, I'm sorry, sir. Can you use the hand sanitizer before you come in?" If they've got their mask around their chin, and can you pull that mask up over your face and your mouth and your nose? And it's not, I mean, they could just keep walking, but having that right at the front door, and they see other customers having to stop there as well, I think is just a good visual blockade and just really helps, while they just say like, we ask that you use hand sanitizer and you must keep your mask on at all times. So that I think helps make it look a little bit more like it's clear that it's store policy because there's a table and a person stationed there.
Yeah. And we use a lot, I feel like not in our script, but we talk a lot about how, we're not sort of making these rules up in a void, like we're relying on the best sort of recommendations coming out of CDC or the local government. And, this is kind of like the latest information that we have. I feel like we had a little bit of a struggle. I don't know if people remember from a few weeks ago about neck gaiter gate, when no, this might have been just a DC thing. I don't know. But whether like buffs or neck gaiters were sort of like an effective mask. And so there was sort of a back and forth, and a lot of that can kind of be really hard to sort of follow. But again, we just stress like whatever those latest kind of guidances and recommendations are, that's who we're choosing to follow. And also it's always okay to kind of interpret that, even more strictly, I guess, it's just like, and because like specific concerns that we have in this community, in this bookstore, as an example, like a lot of our customer base at the main store, skews older, like we're taking like stricter measures because ultimately we are part of the community and we worry about our community. So, anyone feel free to chime in if you have another question or comment. I'm just gonna go through the questions on the chat here. Let's see here. I think we had a question about, is there a way for the host to delete individual comments on Zoom webinar chat, or do you just have to disable the entire chat function if there are inappropriate comments?
Yeah, I think that's one of Zoom's failings, and I'm hoping that they change that with an update. Two things about the chat to keep in mind on Zoom webinar. You cannot delete individual comments. I think you can on Crowdcast, if I remember when we used it. You have to just disable the whole chat. Another thing that to keep in mind that I don't love, and again, I hope they change, is there are 3 settings for the chat on Zoom webinar. You can either completely disable it, so only you as the host can drop links or whatever. You can make it so that they can only chat with the panelists, which God, no, I never want that. Meaning like the author and the moderator. And then you can make it so that they can chat with literally everyone, so attendees and panelists. I don't know why they haven't come up with a setting that's just other attendees and the panelists can't see it. That would be my always default, is that they could chat with each other, and the panelists could see it if they wanted to allow it, but not that it would go directly to the panelists. I don't know why they do that. It drives me crazy. I'm hoping that they change that in an upgrade. But right now, if you want to get rid of an inappropriate comment, you have to just disable the chat.
And what some organizations do, if they want to keep the chat open, they throw the person out who's inappropriately chatting, and then they'll just throw in, 15 times in a row the word say books, 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 so it just gets buried and people don't see it. But
yeah, that's true. You can just drop a bunch of book links in there and move it up so that it's not immediately visible too. But yeah, Josh said Crowdcast is great for moderation. Yeah, Crowdcast is much better about that. I just wish it didn't have so many glitches and cut out on us all the time and stuff. But they do have a better setup for that.
Yeah. Another sort of comment, I think it's from Veronica Word Up, about how their collective had a workshop with the Center for Anti-Violence Education a couple years ago. And something that I kind of wanted to touch on, because another thing too to kind of look into, there may be like nonprofits, organizations, groups that are leading, getting into kind of de-escalation, anti-violence, peace studies, that sort of thing. I know that there was a really big, there was an article in the Washington City paper here, kind of highlighting organizations that were trying to support the retail, the restaurant industry, and specifically getting them kind of de-escalation techniques geared towards, restaurants, but then also restaurants that are trying to operate during the pandemic. So that, I think that there are more and more sort of organizations that you may be able to work with in your communities as we kind of keep chugging along here.
Michael, there was
yeah.
a question from Monica.
Mhm.
Wanted to know if bookstores have hired or would consider hiring security for certain events, and why or why not.
Yeah. So last year we did at Politics and Prose did at some of our events in store. This was kind of a long conversation and kind of a lot of thoughts and concerns about one way or the other. We did end up, we would hire off-duty police officers that would be in the store, would have their kind of police cruiser stationed out in front of the store. And the security, when they were hired, it was never because of any sort of specific concern, because of those sort of more high profile events where we had disruptions at. We would look at sort of the public experience of the author, if they were having a difficult time because of the subject of their book, and that sort of thing. It's something that we did last year. It's something that we're looking at a lot again this year, and to figure out how to move forward with when we do get back to in-person events. Obviously, with everything that has happened this year, and it's something that it's still having ongoing conversations with the staff about. So I would stress that if you do make that decision, just have that conversation with your team members and anyone on staff before going into that event. I'd be curious if anyone has thoughts, or anyone else has brought on security for their events. Okay, we got a few more minutes here. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of, if people can, really do check out, there's a lot of kind of more resources in the chat, so definitely, hold on to some of those. We are getting close to the 55-minute mark. Anyone have any other questions, thoughts, concerns, resources that they'd like the group to know about? All right, well, I think we will call the talk at that. I really appreciate everyone hopping on. I know that this is, a lot to pack in an hour. I hope you found a lot of it useful. If you ever need to reach out to any of us, please let me know. Always happy to chat about this sort of stuff. And I want to say too, I really do think the world of everybody who's on the call right now. Bookstore people are the best people in the world, and you're all doing awesome. And I know it's been tough this year, but keep hanging in there, keep doing cool things. Appreciate everything that you're doing. So much to do left in the conference. I think next we got crafting your thank you space with care, and killer author pitches, not killer author pitches. Very important.
That would be interesting too.
Right? But I appreciate everyone hopping on, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.